This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, January 26th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Tropical cyclone Eloise swept through Mozambique, wreaking havoc, destroying homes and ruining crops. Emma McCarthy has the latest on the powerful storm.
Thousands of people left homeless and hundreds of thousands of acres of crops ruined. Tropical cyclone Eloise ploughed a path of destruction through Mozambique at the weekend, according to the first official report on the disaster. Winds of up to 90 miles per hour hit Mozambique's Sofala coastal province on Saturday morning, with the region's Buzi district hit particularly hard and damage reported in Beira. The port city was the epicentre of destruction nearly 2 years ago from Cyclone Idai, which went on to kill more than 1,000 people across Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe. On Sunday, Mozambique's National Institute for Disaster Risk Management and Reduction said Eloise had injured a dozen or so people and displaced around 7,000. Buzi resident Tamara Brocquet said on Sunday that she had been waiting to be evacuated since the day before, but had not been able to board a boat.
We've left everything behind. We only have the clothes we wear. We're sleeping on the road under the rain.
Nearly 340,000 acres of crops had been ruined and schools and hospitals destroyed and damaged. More than 1,000 homes were completely destroyed, over 3,000 partially destroyed and another 1,500 flooded, the agency said. Eloise weakened on Sunday as it moved inland to dump rain on Zimbabwe, Eswatini and parts of South Africa.
Emma McCarthy of Reuters filed that report. Ghana President Nana Akufo-Addo, lawmakers and a host of dignitaries on Tuesday are paying their final respects in Accra to former President Jerry John Rawlings, Ghana's longest-serving leader. Rawlings, who was 73 years old, died in November of last year, but his cause of death has not been revealed. His burial was partly delayed because Ghana's political leaders disagreed on some logistics of his funeral. Rawlings had a checkered past in Ghana, having led a military junta before coming to power in a coup in 1992. Rawlings was twice democratically elected to 2 four-year terms. His funeral service is set for Wednesday. Nigerians are hopeful after U.S. President Joe Biden reversed former President Donald Trump's travel ban on several predominantly Muslim and African nations, including Nigeria. Timothy Obiezo reports from Abuja.
Joseph Abba wished to honeymoon in the United States after his 2018 wedding, but he says his visa was denied even though he met the basic requirements.
As an applicant, the pain of being refused, even when you know you're qualified, is something else. So knowing the already concluded decisions even before going for interview, so it's a total discouragement on the applicant.
Nigeria was one of several African nations included in a 2017 travel ban imposed by former U.S. President Donald Trump on predominantly Muslim and African nations. The ban made travel from Nigeria to the U.S. nearly impossible. The Trump administration said the ban was imposed because of national security concerns, claiming the countries on the list had not met minimum security standards.
Nigeria is not the only country in the world that is having insecurity as a problem. Security is just like the pandemic of what we're having now. It has become an issue that it's a global problem.
The U.S. is one of Nigeria's top travel destinations. But Abba has not applied for a U.S. visa since he was denied entry. But now, things are different. On his first day in office on January 20, President Joe Biden signed 17 executive orders, including one that overturned the travel ban. Nigerian business owners welcomed the move.
Really big relief for entrepreneurs like me, especially in the travel industry, who can now begin to see so many opportunities coming up, and then we begin to enjoy the benefits of inflows between Nigeria and America.
While the Biden administration appears to be sending a message that U.S. borders are no longer shut to certain countries, some Nigerian political observers say there is an important lesson to be learned.
So America has internal battles to take on. What needs to happen is that we have seen a situation in which there is need now for more people to be autochthonous, to look more inwards rather than outside.
Now, Nigerians like Abba say they will begin to travel again, and travel companies expect to make more income. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja.
Ugandan troops have withdrawn from around the home of opposition leader and pop star Bobi Wine, 38, ending his house arrest since a January 14th election won by long-serving President Yoweri Museveni. With the election behind him and fraud claims by Wine failing to gain traction, Museveni appears to be calculating that he can mollify pressure from Western allies to free his rival without significant risk to his power base. The withdrawal of security forces, which the Ugandan government says were for Wine's own protection, complied with a court order on Monday. A Reuters correspondent on the scene confirmed the move. A former guerrilla leader, Museveni, 76, has long been a Western ally, receiving aid and sending troops to trouble spots, including Somalia, to fight Islamist militants. Calling Ethiopia the critical actor in Horn of Africa's stability, outgoing U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia Michael Rayner voiced confidence in a strengthened bilateral relationship, but warned that violence, especially in the northern Tigray region, threatens the country's progress. At a press conference in Addis Ababa Monday, Rayner said, quote, "We remain concerned about ethnic violence around the country and the threat it poses to achieving the country's potential." He also says the U.S. government also is particularly alarmed by the ongoing situation in Tigray, where Ethiopian federal forces launched a military operation in early November to put down a rebellion by regional forces of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. It was Rayner's final news briefing as ambassador, a post he has held since September 2017. A successor has not yet been named by new U.S. President Joe Biden. American pharmaceutical and biotechnology company Moderna says its current coronavirus vaccine appears to work against the two highly transmissible strains found in the UK and South Africa. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu has more.
The U.S. biotechnology firm Moderna has announced that lab studies show its COVID-19 vaccine remains effective against variants of the coronavirus, first identified in the United Kingdom and South Africa. The emergence of highly contagious variants to the SARS-CoV-2 virus has triggered concern about their impact on the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, even as countries begin to accelerate their immunization programs. Although viruses mutate constantly, scientists are concerned about the mutations discovered in Britain and South Africa because they are believed to be capable of altering key functions of the virus. Moderna says a 2-dose regimen of its COVID-19 vaccine is expected to be protective against the emerging strains detected to date. Dr. Peter Hotez is Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College in Houston, Texas.
My understanding of the Moderna findings is that the virus-neutralizing antibodies to the original vaccine do cross-neutralize both the UK and the South African variant, but that the level of neutralization is down around 6-fold for the South African one. Because the level of virus-neutralizing antibody is still quite high, that 6-fold reduction should not interfere with protection, although potentially it could cause a slight reduction. And for that reason, if the consideration is to give a third boost, third immunization anyway, you might want to go with the South African form.
Moderna says it's taking the precaution of testing a possible booster dose against the strain discovered in South Africa.
There is a possibility, even a likelihood, at some point down the line, we'll need a third immunization, a booster. And that's true for the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine. It could be true of any of the adenovirus vaccine, maybe our vaccine. So the possibility of a third booster has always been in play.
Meanwhile, the Pasteur Institute in France said Monday it is ending development of the vaccine with the U.S. pharmaceutical company Merck after its clinical trial results proved disappointing. Data from Johns Hopkins University show that since it emerged in late 2019, COVID-19 has killed more than 2.1 million people worldwide, with over 99 million cases registered. In Africa, the virus has infected more than 3.4 million, with nearly 3 million people recovering, according to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Linor Moudou, VOA News, Washington.
New York City became the first metropolis in the U.S. to take a deadly hit from the coronavirus pandemic in the spring of 2020. The whole world watched as the city struggled to adapt to the pandemic and the lockdown. Evgeny Maslov filed this report, narrated by Anna Rice.
In the spring of 2020, the rest of the U.S. and the world watched as the city that never sleeps turned into a veritable ghost town. Times Square without tourists, giant screens urging social distancing instead of showing ads. Even the city's most colorful personalities complied with the message.
And people are a little more socially distant, and I'm wearing this to, play along.
Part of Central Park was turned into a tent city for COVID patients. When city hospitals neared capacity, the large Javits Convention Center was converted into a 2,000-bed hospital complex.
I want to begin by thanking all the Army Corps of Engineer people who are here today, who've done an outstanding job. They came in very quickly and they're setting up this emergency hospital, which is going to be badly needed.
The U.S. Navy hospital ship USNS Comfort was docked in the city for weeks, housing over 1,000 COVID patients. The National Guard made sure only doctors boarded the ship. But even as the first coronavirus wave receded, it wasn't until summer that New Yorkers started venturing out. Meeting in places like bars and restaurants gave way to parks and squares, where it was easier to practice social distancing.
2 weeks ago, I had a little engagement thing here. I proposed to my girlfriend, so we had a bunch of people out here.
Yet, pre-pandemic New York has not returned. Fifth Avenue isn't bustling like it once was, but the most dramatic impact is on Broadway, as the many theaters remain closed and not expected to reopen for at least another year.
Coronavirus, yeah, it's like viruses, but life is continuing, What we can do, like put ourselves in jail, in apartment, and how long? No one knows when it's going to wait, 1 year, 2 years.
The tourism industry is hoping it won't be that long. Authorities and business owners hope to see the first wave of tourists in the spring of this year, after more people receive the COVID vaccinations, making it safer to travel. New York welcomed 2021 without the usual celebrations and crowd on Times Square. The almost empty square was another reminder that it will be a long time before the Big Apple forgets 2020. For Evgeny Maslov in New York, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Heavily dependent on tourism and exports, Thailand is one of Asia's worst-hit economies by the coronavirus. Now, as a second wave strikes, an unpopular government is desperately trying to avoid more economic damage. Vijitra Dwangdi has more from Bangkok.
Immaculate lawns and life-sized models of dinosaurs. A magical world awaits visitors to the Nongnut Garden near the Thai resort of Pattaya. Before the pandemic, nearly 10,000 tourists would flock here every day. Now there are only a handful.
We have a new outbreak of COVID-19 at the moment. We barely have any visitors now. We only had around 100 today.
The owner says that he's trying to keep his army of workers in jobs, without the usual income he gets from tourism. Now, a second wave of the coronavirus is doubling the economic pain. The borders are closed, and the all-important Chinese visitors are staying home, rubbing out Thailand's $60 billion tourism annual take. The country's GDP is expected to contract by at least 6% this year, leaving many to turn to a government that is running out of cash. After a record $58 billion stimulus package in the spring of 2020, it has offered just $7 billion in relief for round 2 of the pandemic.
The government is now looking at more injecting and more stimulus and more money to spend, but we don't have that much more money. If you are looking at right now, some sectors such as tourism is asking for specific help in sustaining employment, I think why that is a reasonable thing to ask for, it will be difficult to decide which sector the government is going to help.
Thailand's vast service sector has also taken a hard blow. Small businesses are sinking in debt after shutdowns, mass job losses, and a collapse in consumer spending. 20 million others get by in the informal sector, self-reliant and cut off from government support in times of crisis. Among them is Fun. Every day he takes his bicycle and 2 young daughters to work, mending shoes, mostly in the tourist areas of Bangkok. He used to make around $23 a day. Now he only brings in less than a third of that.
I'm the only one in the family that works to support my wife, my 2 kids, as well as my sister, niece, and nephew. There are virtually no customers because of COVID, so I don't make nearly enough to feed my family.
Hope is in short supply as the wheels come off the Thai economy. Vijitra Dungdi for VOA News, Bangkok.
Jill Biden, the wife of recently inaugurated President Joe Biden, has made clear that education policy will be a priority for her in the White House. Jill Biden is familiar with life in Washington because her husband spent 36 years in the U.S. Senate and 8 years as vice president under Barack Obama. VOA's Isha Sarai and Caroline Presutti bring us more about Jill Biden in this profile.
It's been Joe's faith that really has gotten him.
This is Jill Biden these days.
And that's exactly what my husband Joe is going to do.
Holding virtual campaign rallies for her husband. This one to a group of Latinas. A day later, Zooming at a community college.
Hi, Erin.
A forum near to her heart.
I'm Jill Biden, and I'm honored to be a community college professor.
Jill Biden became the first ever second lady to hold a paying job outside the White House, while her husband was vice president.
Many of my students don't know that I have 2 jobs.
At her college's commencement, she told the story of a student who ran into her classroom saying,
Dr. B, I saw you last night on the television with Michelle Obama. And I called my mother and I said, Mom, there's my English teacher. And she said, that's not your English teacher, that's the second lady.
If Joe Biden is elected, Jill Biden would be the first presidential spouse to have earned a doctorate. Betty Boyd Caroli wrote the book, First Ladies.
I would expect her to be very active in suggesting specific reforms to the education system, but not everybody agrees. Many people would like a first lady who keeps her mouth shut and is seen only in the very best clothes. I'm not in that school. I really think it's a powerful platform.
Life with Joe Biden started out complicated. She was going through a divorce. He was grieving, raising 2 young sons alone after his wife and baby died in a car crash. Jill and Joe married after Joe asked 5 times.
And the 5th time, I finally said to her, I said, Jill, my Irish pride has gotten hold of me. It's the last time I'm going to ask you. I said, you don't have to tell me when you'll marry me, just if you'll marry me. She said, yes.
And 4 years later, Jill gave birth to a daughter. Tragedy would strike again in 2015 as Joe Biden's son, Bo, died of brain cancer.
This is personal for me and for my husband, Joe.
So Jill Biden added cancer initiatives to her list of causes.
So should we read? Sure.
In June of this year, Joe Biden wrote a children's book.
Not only did he lose his fear of public speaking,
About her husband's early years, his competitiveness and resilience after being mocked over his stutter. Mrs. Biden displayed that protective streak during a March campaign rally. Watch how she uses her body to block a protester from reaching her husband. Not once, but twice. Although they call the tiny state of Delaware their home, Jill Biden has followed Joe through his last 21 years as a U.S. Senator on Capitol Hill and 8 years in the White House, where she'd like to return for at least 4 more.
Buenas tardes, comadres.
Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Washington.
Less than a week into Joe Biden's presidency, sweeping changes are underway at the Pentagon as the new U.S. President and new Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin look to undo changes made by former President Donald Trump. VOA National Security Correspondent Jeff Seldin has more.
Well, folks, thank you very much for being here.
Flanked by top military officials, President Joe Biden, with the stroke of a pen, undid one of his predecessor's more divisive policies, a ban on transgender individuals serving in the military.
And what I'm doing is enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform.
On Twitter, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin praised the move, calling it not only the right thing, but the smart thing to do. Monday's executive order is just the latest step by the new administration to help the U.S. military change course, since Austin first arrived at the Pentagon this past Friday, making good on a promise the secretary gave lawmakers a week earlier at his confirmation hearing.
We also owe our people a working environment free of discrimination, hate, and harassment. And if confirmed, I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault and to rid our ranks of racists and extremists.
Already, Austin has issued a memo demanding action against sexual assault, but making progress on the growing problem of extremism, evidenced by the number of former military members who took part in the siege of the U.S. Capitol, may be more difficult.
We've got to get beyond just kind of, screening individuals for potential, neo-Nazi tattoos. It's got to be far more than that. There's got to be greater awareness of what new recruits and active service members are doing online.
Yet Austin is facing down other challenges as well. Having promised to help with the U.S. response to the coronavirus pandemic, he has also been reaching out to key allies, while critical choices loom on what to do next in Iran and Afghanistan, where the number of U.S. troops is down to years-long lows, and in Africa, where the U.S. military footprint has also been shrinking. So, too, there are heightened tensions with Russia, concerns about North Korea, Iran, and then there is China.
I would put China at the top. I see China as the preeminent threat. So in some cases, and American people and our friends around the world need to understand this, the Chinese have fielded systems that are as good or better than ours.
A lengthy to-do list for America's newest Secretary of Defense. Jeff Seldin, VOA News, Washington.
Supporters of Britain's exit from the European Union said it would offer economic opportunities outside the EU. But 4 weeks after Britain finally quit the bloc at the end of 2020, many businesses say they are facing significant disruption and extra costs. Henry Ridgell reports from London.
Fish played a big role in the brinkmanship leading up to December's Brexit deal. Under the agreement, a quarter of European boats' fishing rights in British waters will be transferred to British boats over the next 5 years. Not good enough, say these trawlermen in Cornwall, southern England, who claim Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised them full control over British waters.
We're worse off than before Brexit because it's all written in that we won't be able to get it back. And it's just a travesty. Boris the betrayer has completely sold us down the river.
Nearly half of fish caught by British boats is exported to the European Union, a trade worth over $1.8 billion in 2019. But Brexit has brought border checks, paperwork, delays and costs. Several export firms staged a protest outside Parliament this month.
live shellfish, it's not sell-by date, it's live or dead. It's unless the government do something, a lot of these businesses will be finished.
The government insists the problems will be ironed out.
Teething problems, people not filling in the right forms or misunderstandings, and when it's not people's fault, of course we're going to compensate and to help out, and funds have been put in place to do that. But be in no doubt, Nick, that there are great opportunities for fishermen across the whole of the UK to take advantage of the spectacular marine wealth of the United Kingdom.
But it's not just fish that are floundering. Other sectors warn of significant disruption. New tax rules have prompted some European retailers to stop selling to British customers, while some shipping firms have paused their cross-channel operations.
If the wheels aren't moving, they're losing money. And ultimately, so are we.
Supermarkets in Northern Ireland have faced shortages owing to extra checks on goods shipped from mainland Britain. So is it teething troubles or an inevitable consequence of Britain's decision to quit the EU? It depends on the sector, says analyst Rem Korteweg.
This question of groupage in that hauliers are now facing, where they have to sign forms for every single shoebox or crate that is in their container. I think those things can be simplified. Where I don't think we are currently facing teething problems and things are much more structural is, for instance, in the health and sanitary and phytosanitary and food safety checks, for instance, with fish exports, because that is the consequence of leaving the single market, that there is now a regulatory border.
Britain insists Brexit will offer economic opportunities outside the EU. Its strategy was given a boost this week as Japanese carmaker Nissan pledged to keep building cars in Britain and to invest millions of dollars building a new factory to make batteries for electric vehicles. But for other businesses suffering amid the coronavirus pandemic, Brexit has so far brought costs and little benefit. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.